quick check 1, 2. Just make sure everything works. Make sure that we also don't get any of that weird staticky thing that happens sometimes. We should be good to go now. So, here we are just hopping into the session now. And the series finale for the BM246W challenge is about to get kicked off here at Watkins, Glen. It has been a long time coming. 8 previous weeks, or 9 if you really consider the preseason. But we round out this series with one final round in the BMW M6 GT3. And there is quite a bit on the line in terms of the overall Drivers' Championship. That battle is going to be between Wagner and Douglas. Douglas needs a win with Wagner to finish 16th or lower. And Wagner just really needs to finish this race tonight in a respectable position. Not going to have too many cars to have ahead of him that would force Wagner to be in that less than optimal position. Douglas would also need to have the fastest lap as Breakfast goes into the wall up the S's. Through the bus stop. Douglas with 47.6, but we should see these times come down into the 45s. Mikey P2, we had just gotten started with this practice session. But there is a bit of a championship fight tonight, both between drivers at the front and between teammates. We'll get into that championship fight here in just a second. And another series finale, another season finale, essentially. Call it whatever you may. This is the end of the BMW, or the BM246W Challenge Series. But it does have the duration of a regular season. Douglas going into the wall there, coming out of the final corner onto the pit straight. Very easy to do that, though. And he is going to dive off the racing line back into the pit lane. Having a bit of a look at the championship fight. It's between Douglas and Wagner at the top of the field. Wagner out getting some practice in. Running a very gold livery on that BMW M6 GT3. And again, Wagner just needs to finish P15th or higher to clinch the championship tonight. A 1 hour race, no mandatory stop, and going off what we saw last week at Bathurst, no stop is going to be the better strategy. Do have a bit of a team battle as well. Bird and Douglas, teammates, are in the lead in the team championship. Atwell and Wagner are close behind. And then Heiderstadt and Lindbergh, the teammates, in third. Heiderstadt and Lindbergh should be fairly comfortable in that third position. I'm not exactly sure of their ability to move up in the point standings, but it is really going to be who finishes ahead of the other between both Peregrine Racing with Bird and Douglas and Throwing Pancake Racing with Wagner and Atwell. I believe that Heiderstadt should have the AM class locked down. Atwell is behind, and this is going to be another 90-point race, a triple-point race, just like the previous round at Bathurst. So if Heiderstadt finished dead last, I don't know that it would necessarily be enough to knock him out of the fight, as he has quite the lead, about an 80-point lead, 75-point lead, I believe, in the Holy Grail Championship. So Heiderstadt should be looking at that promotion at the end of the racing tonight. About 5 minutes left in free practice before we get started with our final qualifying session of this season. Through the bus stop goes Wagner. Does have the lead in this practice session. 2/10 quicker than Douglas, 3/4 of a second quicker than Bird, a little over 3/4 of a second quicker than Mikey. And then there is a 1.5 second gap from Wagner down to Young. Jennings and Boiling running identical lap times, and Vasquez seemingly having some trouble getting the car around the track safely. A few more drivers still in the pit lane have not gone out and completed laps yet. And I think Douglas just preserving himself for the qualifying session. It's going to be clear, shouldn't have any issues with weather, but it is quite warm on track. 46 degrees Celsius the track temperature, 36 degrees ambient. Wagner will bring it into the pit lane. Who else is coming down? That is Jennings coming across the line. This has been quite an eventful series. A lot of shakeup in this series, as many drivers that are typically extremely dominant having some trouble with the slower cars in the lower classes, the M2s and the GT4s. Some starting to come to stride in GT4, some it taking a little bit longer and not really hitting that stride until the GT4s or the GT3s. But the thing is, with this season and a rotating spec, you do need to score points in the lower classes, because unless you win every single race, it's going to be hard to make up ground in those higher classes. One could say they are equalized a bit as Mikey gets kicked off of that exit curb at the bus stop. Was a good save, though. Down the chute, up towards the toe of the boot. Just trying to use that camber a little wide off the apex, though. will have one more opportunity at a lap once he finishes this one, the majority of the field staying in the pit lane. Bit of, I'd say, a big slide of the rear coming around the heel of the boot. Into the final corner, I think Mikey may go for another lap. That's exactly what he's going to do, or at least finish this one. 88 hundredths of a second off. Did not improve there, but going forward on this final lap. The track is only fast for the time being, so we'd hope to see the track develop a little bit more in qualifying. Up through the S's into the bus stop. Now the bus stop here, for those of you unfamiliar with Watkins Glen, is a very, very tricky section. For some, tricky to do on your own, but it is very, very hard to try to navigate through there too wide. And at the beginning of this race, they are going to be jostling for position coming into that bus stop, and you pretty much just need to agree to hold your line through there. If you are in the inopportune position, you need to recognize that for yourself. And how would you say, check yourself before you wreck yourself, as two drivers playing chicken into the bus stop would be a very quick way to drop both of you back down the order or cause a very, very large incident. Chaos has been no stranger in this M2 or in this BMW 246 series. Mikey coming through turns 10 invalidates, and that's going to bring an end to the qualifying session, or the end to the practice session, and we are now green for qualifying. Who is out there first? It is Douglas. Of course it is Douglas, the one driver needing to win this race. It's a tall order for the championship win, but it is not impossible. But he would need Wagner to have a very, very, very bad day. First out on track with the clean track all to himself. Does need to warm up the tires. And this track is going to develop a little bit through this qualifying session. 15-minute full grid qualifying, no splits. And those red numbers that you see on the leaderboard, those are our Holy Grail drivers. There is a bit of a battle in the Holy Grail series. Heiderstadt leads with a 75-point lead, but this is a 90-point race, so if I believe Heiderstadt finished last, I don't know that that would necessarily take him out of the lead of the championship. He may have it clinched. But it's a must-win for Atwell and needs Heiderstadt to have a very poor finish tonight. But Heiderstadt has rapidly improved throughout this season. Mistakes have become less and less common. I don't think Heiderstadt would really budge much, but even then, Heiderstadt has a lot of Atwell's potential points covered off. So it would just need to be a good finish for Heiderstadt tonight to clinch that championship. The real fight is going to be between the number 32 of Douglas and the number 99 of Wagner. Those two are in the fight for the championship. Wagner does have the lead in that championship by quite a bit. But Wagner just needs to finish P16. And Douglas would have to both win the race and get the fastest lap. There is bonus points awarded for the fastest lap, but needs to win the race and get the fastest lap to demote this man, the number 99 of Wagner. And aside from the Drivers' Championship, there is a battle for the Team Championship. Wagner and Atwell both teammates. Bird and Douglas teammates, and two of those drivers fighting for the championship tonight. Will also be fighting for the team championship. And I believe how they finish, it would be enough if both drivers, or if one driver finished ahead of the other. So if you say Bird and, or if you say Douglas and Atwell, or Douglas and Wagner, if Douglas finishes ahead of Wagner, that would give points to Douglas's team. And if Bird finishes ahead of Atwell, that would give points to Douglas and Bird's team as well. Trying to promote both of them, so you kind of think they've both got a target that they need to beat. Douglas already going to be trying to do as much work as possible to get ahead of Wagner. 47.2, the first time on the board, but we should see these times start to drop as the track develops a little bit more. The track is currently fast. We may see a bit of optimum track conditions by the time this qualifying session is over. So it may be very late into the session, but we could see that optimum track. Douglas so far doing what he needs to do on pole position. Needs pole position, needs the fastest lap, needs to win this race, and needs Wagner to get involved in some sort of incident or run out of fuel or something in order to take the championship away from Wagner. But as of right now, Wagner is firmly atop the standings. And it's right around a 35-point difference between Peregrine Racing with Douglas and Bird. So Douglas and Bird are ahead in that fight. Wagner and Atwell in P2. And then Lindbergh and Heiderstadt not far behind, only 7 points behind the Throwing Pancake Racing team of Wagner and Atwell. So if Lindbergh and Heiderstadt both have a very good finish tonight, which we have seen Lindbergh up there on the podium, needs to find some pace in the M6 GT3 tonight. 46.6, the new pole position for Douglas. And Wagner answers enough for P2, but not enough to take that pole position away. And into the bus stop. Douglas is deep, and that is going to invalidate the lap. Stays with it for now, may continue to take this car around for another lap. And Heiderstadt in the Holy Grail. About 0.3 of a second faster than his championship competitor Atwell, but Heiderstadt has that championship covered off nicely. Currently in pole position for the Holy Grail, as we are approaching the halfway point of this qualifying session. Back on with Douglas. Mikey in P3, just over 1/4 of a second behind the 46.6 set by Douglas. And Vasquez also trying to spoil this fight. Just over 1/2 a second behind, is in the pit lane, maybe tweaking that setup just a little bit before heading back out. Into the final 2 corners goes Douglas. Across the line did not improve. That lap was invalid. But sets up nicely for another lap. And very, very wide on the outside curb at turn 1. Running up through the S's, does have the 45 of Lindbergh up ahead. And currently, As the standings sit now, if Douglas and Bird finish in their respective positions, it would lock down the team championship for them. Atwell down to P13 overall. The team championship is calculated on overall standings, not class respective between overall or Holy Grail. Douglas doesn't like it, pulls it into the pit lane. We'll hop on board with Wagner, who was chasing. We'll see if Wagner has anything in his pocket here. Needs 0.2 of a second to take this pole position away from Douglas. Up into the toe. Turn 7. Doesn't need a huge improvement to take this pole position away. But Mikey doesn't need a huge improvement either. Coming down into the chute. Not far behind Wagner. But these two will be potentially in this fight for that pole position. Douglas back out of the pit lane. Getting some more laps in to attempt that pole position. Needs to find some insurance because as of right now, that 0.2 needed cut down by quite a bit. Just 12 hundredths of a second, or yeah, 12 hundredths of a second between Douglas and Wagner. It just needs a marginal improvement once again. Mikey still at that 2.7 behind. Running nice and wide out of the final corner. We'll see if this is an improvement. Holding that steering wheel very, very straight is not an improvement there, but should set him up nicely to go for another flying lap here. Elizondo in the number 15 would have been a dominant driver, but out for a large portion of the season with an injury. Has made it back into the seat. We'll see what Elizondo is able to bring tonight. Still yet to put a time up on the board, but Elizondo very, very quick. Could be a disruptor in that championship fight along with Vasquez and Mikey. Boiling also another quick driver. Still yet to qualify, may not be qualifying. Hopping back on with our current pole sitter Douglas. Coming through the bus stop, trying to abuse those curbs. That last curb at the bus stop has been very, very mean to Douglas so far. 2 laps in a row being compromised by that final curb coming out of the bus stop. And Atwell down to P3 in the Holy Grail. Around a second and a half behind the time set by Heiderstadt. And that is not going to help the case for the Throwing Pancake Racing team of Wagner and Atwell. They need to try and outscore Bird and Douglas, who are P1 and P5 currently. Also need to outscore Heiderstadt and Lindbergh. And while Wagner would be able to do a good bit of that work on the north side, on the south side, Atwell has some ground to make up to ensure that they score enough points to cover off the 7 points needed to close the gap between those two teams. 2 more laps for Douglas to try to improve. And the times have stagnated, but we have just been kicked over to optimum track, so we'll see if Douglas is able to bring a lap. It's not going to happen on that one. I think that may have been invalidated at turn 1, going too wide, stepping that rear tire out over the curb, just past the curb. Wagner on this lap may have something in his pocket to try to improve. Bird back into the pit lane. Trotman Grant with a bit of an incident at turn 1. And I don't think Bird will have enough time to get back out and around in time to start another flying lap. It would be very close. He may have enough time, and I think he's going for it, but just barely going to make it back across the line. Wagner, no improvement here, is going to have this lap and one more. I think that may also be invalid for Wagner, but I'd have to see. With this optimum track, they should be running faster lap times. Elizondo up into P4, Vasquez up into P3. And it is very tight up here at the front. 3.2 tenths of a second, the gap from P1 to P5. And with this optimum track, we should see times continue to drop. Now Wagner on this lap made the same mistake that Douglas did earlier, so we'll see if Douglas is still on a valid lap and whether or not this lap comes across clean. If it does, then we could expect an improvement from Wagner. No, it was not, so this is going to be the final round. Final time around the track for Douglas in this final qualifying session of the TRC BM246W Challenge. And it is all going to culminate in this one final event, 1 hour race here at Watkins Glen. No required pit stops. And there's some lessons to be learned from the previous round at Bathurst. Douglas going to be one of those drivers learning that lesson the hardest. Pit from the lead when it was not necessarily the best strategy to do so. Did not recover the time lost in the pit lane with the faster tires. So likely going to be no stops across the board, at least if it can be helped. Clock will round to 0. Vasquez will barely make it across with another lap to go. Less than a tenth behind Elizondo, whose Elizondo has knocked Douglas down to P3. Douglas with a lot of work, but it's got to be everything that he's got. Needs a quarter of a second on this lap. We'll see if he has it. Vasquez into the pit lane will not improve. P2 and no better for Vasquez. Young up ahead of Douglas here, but we'll see if Douglas has anything to bring. Wagner into the pit lane. Does Douglas have an improvement as he comes across the line? What's it going to be? Not enough to improve. P3 for Douglas, out of that pole position and off the front row. And Elizondo currently your pole sitter, as he is going to abandon that lap. The number 12 of Norman across the line up to P11. The number 19 of Merkel right behind. Does he improve up to P9? Trotman Granton behind, hopping into the pit lane. The number, that is the number 109 of Heiderstadt, looking for an improvement. I don't know if this is going to be one. And hopping out of the way of Mikey, who is right behind, looking for an improvement up to P4, knocks Wagner down to P5, so the championship contenders will be one behind the other in the second and third rows. And we have our grid set for tonight. Overall, Elizondo on pole, Vasquez P2, Douglas P3, Mikey P4, Wagner P5. Elizondo and Vasquez both throwing a wrench in the works for this championship fight today. And Elizondo, your pole sitter. Elizondo P1, Vasquez P2, Douglas P3, Mikey P4, Wagner P5, Bird P6, Young P7, Lindbergh P8, Merkel P9, Breakfast P10, Heiderstadt P11, Norman P12, Atwell P13, Wilson P14, Trotman Grant P15, Miller P16, Granados P17, Boiling P18, and Jennings P19. Granados, Boiling, and Jennings not setting a lap, or actually just Boiling and Jennings not setting a lap. So we look at the team fight. This will actually hop over to the Holy Grail qualifying. Heiderstadt P1, Atwell P2, Trotman Grant P3, and Granados P4. Heiderstadt just needs to finish ahead of Atwell to cover that off, and I think if he finished right behind Atwell or finished last tonight, it would be just fine for Heiderstadt should have that clinched tonight. So the teammates Douglas and Bird, as they finish right now, they would clinch the team championship. Douglas and Bird both need a terrible finish tonight in order to drop from the lead of the team championship. But the real fight for the team championship is going to be between P2, between Wagner and Atwell versus Lindbergh and Heiderstadt. Lindbergh and Heiderstadt very close to each other. Wagner and Atwell seemingly at opposite ends of the spectrum, P5 and P13 respectively. So we should see a little bit of teamwork tonight as we are about to get started with this race. Thank you for tuning in. Commentate quite a few league across many different events, so if you would like to tune in to those streams, make sure that you are following me on Twitch and YouTube. The YouTube side, we are very close to 100 subscribers, so I would greatly appreciate a follow on that side. And we've got about 2.5 minutes before we are engines fired, 3 minutes before we get rolling. And throughout the duration of this season, if you have appreciated the streams, I would greatly appreciate it if you consider throwing a Twitch Prime subscription or just a regular Twitch subscription, as well as clicking the link in the About tab on the channel if you would like to support me in a different way. The overlays that I use do cost money, and I would like to just keep those monetized, or I guess covered through the Twitch streams themselves. And again, anything that you guys do is greatly appreciated, and I will likely reach out to you personally if you use that link as I usually do. So Elizondo on pole with Vasquez in P2, and they are going to have a tough fight tonight. Both very quick drivers, spend a lot of time on the track in the off time practicing. Always take these championships very, very seriously. And they are going to be lined up one right beside the other with the championship contenders one behind the other. That is going to be Douglas and Wagner. Douglas going to just try to cover off Wagner. Needed Wagner to be a little bit further back into the pack and maybe make it harder for him to move up in positions, but Wagner very hard to contain, came back from all the way at the back of the field. It was essentially a last to first after the opening incident at the Bathurst 1 hour race we had with these cars last week. And Wagner just showing that he can perform under that pressure and come back when it matters most. Wagner going to be very hard to cover off, and once again, Douglas needs the fastest lap and Wagner to finish P16th or lower in order to clinch this race tonight, to clinch the championship. Douglas could win it. We have seen Douglas win these races. Elizondo could win it. Vasquez could win it. Mikey could win it. Wagner could win it. Bird also a previous race winner. And Young, P7, a good qualifying result for Young, just noting that there. Merkel as well, P9. And Jennings, I believe we have lost Jennings. I noticed we did lose one driver, and it seems to be that it was the number 59 of Jennings. We are now rolling for the final time tonight here in the TRC BM246W Challenge Series. Elizondo at the front of the field needs to defend against Vasquez. Not in contention for the championship, but would very much like to end this season on a high note. Vasquez would as well. Not having the best of times when it comes to the finishing positions, at least through the M2 and M4 GT4 sections of this series, as they come up through the S's. Just trying to generate that tire temperature, get those brake temperatures up. You want to make sure that you have those tires nice and warm when you go to lean on them coming into the bus stop, as 2 wide, maybe even 3 wide down the short straightaway coming out of the S's running up to the bus stop. It will be very, very hairy on that first lap. We should see 2, 3, maybe even 4 wide, depending on how hard they want to fight for those spots. And Heiderstadt, what has happened to Heiderstadt? I think maybe starting in the pit lane, strategically not wanting to be involved in any sort of starting incident in this race, which could play very nicely into his hopes to take home that Holy Grail Championship tonight and win some artwork in the process. Up around the toe, the slight camber, slight banking uphill right-hander, where we can see some action. Very easy to get caught out running up that right-hander. You can also set up the move into that right-hander. Coming down the chute, also potential for an overtake. Coming into the heel, potential for an overtake. It's easy to get right up behind, but hard to really make it stick when you go for that pass. So we could see some very aggressive moves here tonight. Very hard to make an overtake happen. Pretty much all the way from turn 10 all the way back around to the bus stop. You are going to be within that slipstream range, but you are going to have a bit of aero wash coming up through the S's. You want to try and get that move cleared off by the time you get to the bus stop, but it is a little harder than it seems. We line up 2 by 2 coming out of the penultimate corner as we get ready to take the green flag for the final time tonight. The final time for this TRC BM246W challenge. Elizondo at the front. Elizondo at the front with Vasquez to his side. Had a little bit of a brain malfunction there. Douglas and Wagner, the championship contenders, on the inside, one behind the other. Mikey, who can quickly be a disturbance in this fight, in P3. And green, we are racing for the final time. They spread out looking for track position as we run into turn number 1. Elizondo, nice at the inside, but we have had some incident behind her. No, that is Heiderstadt getting kicked off and rolling out of the pit lane. Running up through the S's. Everyone seems to be nice and contained for the time being. Elizondo getting a bit of a breakout run, and Douglas behind wants to find a way past Vasquez into the bus stop. Will he be able to find that, though? Needs to run away from Wagner, who is just 2 places behind. Bit wide around the outer loop. Now running down the chute. As we have had an incident. Who is that between? That is Breakfast and Norman involved. Norman with big damage. That is going to be into the pit lane for Norman. Boiling also involved. Has some damage on the front of that car. At the front of the field, Elizondo, Vasquez, Douglas, Mikey, Wagner, all running respectively. A bit of a gap starting to grow between Mikey, Wagner, and Bird. Bird with Lindbergh behind. Remember, this is a fight for the team standings. Lindbergh and Heiderstadt teammates. Heiderstadt has a bit of work to catch back up to the field and try and get past Atwell, but with open track all to himself, it is very easy to gain back up to the pack, as Heiderstadt has almost already caught the back of that lead pack. Elizondo will lead the first lap of this race, as we have had a train start to begin very early, pretty much going all the way back to Atwell, who is really starting to get thrown into no man's land. Young in P8 is still holding on to the slipstream of those drivers up ahead, but I think that grip is beginning to slip as well. Lindbergh, the next closest with Bird, just up ahead as they come through the bus stop once again. Vasquez trying to get a better run. What has happened to Douglas? He has had to abandon it. Will rejoin the track at a slower pace and will rejoin behind Wagner. So as of right now, if they finished where they stay now, Wagner is in a position to clinch this championship fight. Again, Wagner needs to finish P16 or lower. Douglas needs to win this race in order to take that championship away. And what has happened behind, that's Lindbergh off into the wall, and now dropping back into the clutches of Young in P8. And that does break Lindbergh off of that fight, as Lindbergh is now the last car in this train of the top 6, holding on to that slipstream of Douglas up ahead. Elizondo will lead lap 2. Vasquez right behind, though. We'll go on board with Vasquez, trying to chase down Elizondo into turn 1. And here you're able to gauge the entry speed of the turn of the car ahead. Try and get a better run through there. You also have that slipstream you can use to your advantage running up the S's into the bus stop, but it is very hard, especially in a spec class such as this one, to really get much of a run ahead of the car ahead of you into the bus stop. Vasquez trying to drive deeper. What has happened here? Atwell into the pit lane, and that is big both in the team championship fight and the Holy Grail Championship fight, as that would pretty much just give it to Heiderstadt there. Just needs to run his own race for the remainder, but that also will drop Wagner and Atwell down in the team championship. So we'll go back on board with Vasquez, riding along with this fight for the lead. Trying to look for a move into turn 8. Hard to find it. You can try to force the car ahead to go defensive, get slightly off of the racing line, and open up an opportunity for yourself should you take the racing line and get a better run through the corner. Into the penultimate corner, Elizondo ahead with a bit of a slide. Vasquez is trying to get a better drive out of the final corner. Very easy to push too hard through that final corner and run yourself into that outside wall. But as of right now, Vasquez and Elizondo in a league of their own at the front of the field, as they are racing behind Wagner and Douglas, the championship contenders. As Wagner right now in a low pressure situation, doesn't need to win this race, doesn't need to really worry about falling back too far. Again, has to finish P16 or lower, and right now with Atwell and Norman both having had to go into the pit lane, Norman laps down, Atwell will be laps down. That P16 is really the bottom, at least in terms of how far Wagner can go. And again, it would have to be something absolutely catastrophic for Wagner to drop that far down the order, given the cleanliness of his racing throughout this season. continuing to fight at the front, and Mikey trying to defend P3. As we've got a bit of a train queuing up behind. These three, you can essentially write those other two at the front into their own category, but these three, Mikey, Wagner, and Douglas, have been absolutely fighting all season. Mikey ahead of Wagner. Wagner is pushing. Douglas needs Wagner and Mikey to fight. Wagner a bit of a checkup into the final corner. Had set up for a better run, but nowhere to take that momentum. And a corner such as turn 11 is just very hard to really get positioned properly. Still running with that slipstream. Douglas in a really good spot here. May look for a move into the bus stop. As we have a move for the lead beginning to develop. Vasquez forcing Elizondo defensive into the bus stop. What is going to happen with these drivers behind? Wagner very, very narrow. Douglas getting a little caught out on that exit curb. A big issue that we saw Douglas have both in practice and qualifying. Down into the chute. Vasquez still putting that pressure on Elizondo, not letting him get away with it easy. Mikey, Wagner, and Douglas continue to fight behind. And again, key factor here, we are likely going to see no stops. I don't think that there is going to be much of a gain with the pit stop, at least from what we saw last week at Bathurst. So likely everybody's loaded up on fuel to go the distance. And maybe some nursing of the tires. As of right now, it doesn't seem like any of these top five are nursing those tires, as they are absolutely brawling for these positions. Mikey goes wide. Will Wagner find an opening? Wagner will have a better run, carrying more momentum. Douglas just needs to hold on to that slipstream. And Bird right behind the teammate. Should Douglas and Bird finish where they are now, if they do not, or if Douglas is not able to clinch the Drivers' Championship tonight, would at least be in a prime position to take home the team championship. Wagner and Mikey. Wagner is all over the rear of Mikey, kind of pushing Mikey into the bus stop. Wagner makes a slight mistake. Douglas wanted to try and take advantage of it. Was not really able to. Douglas actually had to take a bit of an evasive maneuver to not make contact with Wagner coming out of the bus stop, and that actually affords Mikey some breathing room, as there's a bit of a push and pull of Wagner in this fight. Gets really close to Mikey up ahead, puts the pressure on, falls back into the clutches of Douglas. Fights back from Douglas, moves closer up onto Mikey, and then the cycle continues. We're going to have to wait for something to break, as just like engines, these battles can continue to run, do the same thing for quite some time, but eventually something does break. You cannot race hard and close for an extended period of time without something happening. And Mikey, that something has happened right there, wide into the final corner, pushing too hard, trying to build that gap, and has made contact with that outside wall, and that severely compromises your run down the pit straight. And Wagner made a bit of a mistake getting too much of the weight of that car onto that inside curb at turn 1. Began to really rotate that car in a way that you do not want it to, and that has killed Wagner's momentum. Is Wagner in a position to take advantage of Mikey's misfortune, makes a misfortune of his own, and now that push and pull continues. Douglas right behind Wagner now and getting a great run through the bus stop, at least through the first part of it. seemingly did not get as good of a run out of the exit of the bus stop, which has been a big problem point for Douglas. Hopefully that does not culminate a big mistake from Douglas later on into this race. And up at the front, talk about a battle that can't last forever. As Elizondo, you see the signs of him pushing 2 tires into the grass at the exit of turn 7, the toe of the boot, as they come through the heel. Vasquez still just working on Elizondo. Still a long way to go, only right at a quarter of a way through this race. Vasquez, you can see he is pushing as he got a little sideways coming out of turn 9. Atwell back out of the pit lane, but does have the leaders right behind. And did Norman have another incident? No, I think he may have just gone into the dirt slightly. And now we've got some impatience beginning to brew as we'll go on board with Douglas and watch this from behind. Douglas chasing Wagner, who is chasing Mikey up ahead. Douglas very, very close to that inside wall. I think that may have been a little bit closer than he really wanted to be. Wagner going slightly defensive against Douglas, maybe trying to force Mikey to go defensive up ahead. Mikey did not take that bait though. Douglas still just trying to hold behind. 2 drivers up ahead. Could drop Douglas. If Douglas gets out of that slipstream range, could be catastrophic for his race. As of right now, no problems. Hopping on board with Vasquez just up ahead. This is a fight for the lead that is continuing. Vasquez not close enough there. Mikey, Wagner, and Douglas will continue to race the trio of themselves. As we do have some fights brewing as Young makes a big mistake coming out of turn 8, a big slide up into turn 9. Wilson may have an opportunity for an overtake here and take that 8th place spot away from Young. Can't get too far away of this fight at the front of the field though, as Douglas trying to really get into Wagner's mind, trying to force him defensive. He did not take the bait. And Douglas now trying to get Wagner to drive deeper into turn number 1, which I think he did. Douglas will try to get a better run up the S's in that slipstream range. And the 10 of Boiling still in the pit lane as they come through the bus stop. Once again, equalized between each other. Same with this fight at the front of the field. Elizondo and Vasquez just continuing to run respective of each other. Douglas with Wagner and Mikey up ahead. Again, that push and pull, that yin and yang continues to go on. Mikey makes a mistake at the toe though. And now Mikey will have to go defensive. Wagner follows as Mikey tries to break that toe down into turn 8. Wagner getting hungry now, seeing the opportunity there, just no real opportunity to take advantage of Mikey's shortcomings. But it is beginning to grow. The pressure is bounding. We'll see if Wagner is able to find a way past Mikey or if Douglas finds a way past Wagner before that happens. Back up at the front. Vasquez had dropped out of that slipstream range of Elizondo. But I would say now That Vasquez is right back in it. Vasquez does have this fastest lap, likely due to slipstream. Vasquez running very deep into the bus stop. 2 tires on the dirt. And Douglas beginning to drop back from Wagner. Again, Wagner does have the buffer of Mikey up ahead. So Douglas just needs Mikey to stay ahead of Wagner. If Mikey makes it hard for Wagner to go past, Douglas is able to get right back into this fight, but Wagner he wanted to go for it there at turn 7, but the opportunity did not really seem to be a good opportunity to take. And Wagner just had to back out of that one. Mikey again did not take the bait. Just trying to set up this overtake, slow and methodical, and wait for the opportunity to arise. Wilson and Young still fighting for position coming into turn 9. Back on with this fight at the front for the final spot on the podium. Wagner tries to get alongside Mikey. Mikey again doesn't take the bait, takes the racing line. And Wagner getting a little bit desperate. Again, Wagner not in a very high pressure situation. Douglas is in a must win, and that win is just cruising away in the form of Elizondo and Vasquez building that gap up ahead. At the next timing line, we'll see what that gap has grown to, 6.6 seconds. Between Mikey, as Mikey goes very deep into the bus stop. Wagner also goes deep. Is Douglas going to find a way past? Douglas at the inside at the outer loop will lock in just ahead of Wagner. And Douglas puts himself where he needs to be. Wagner does seem to be the faster driver. But Douglas now able to try and hold Wagner behind. Push the envelope onto Mikey, who is seemingly having some issues. And at the front of the field, Vasquez and Elizondo still very, very close. Vasquez right behind, just not taking the opportunity to get that overtake yet. Douglas right behind Mikey. Wagner right there in tow. Running it down into turn 10, now turn 11. Douglas trying to carry this momentum before it dies. And I think Douglas is going to be able to do exactly that. They're going to be side by side running down the pit straight. That does give Wagner the slipstream and the higher top speed, but Douglas later on the brakes will slot in ahead of Mikey. They bang doors there, 3 wide heading up the S's. Does Wagner have both of them back? No, the championship contenders side by side up through the S's, banging doors against each other. Douglas will slot in ahead of Wagner. Wagner got outside into those marbles, and somehow it's like a ball and cup game. You shuffle them all up together. Somehow they're still in the same spot. And Mikey now trying to get a move on. As Douglas and Wagner, if they continue to fight the way that they are, Mikey will be able to cruise away with this 3rd place position, but I don't think it's going to be that easy for Mikey. As they come down into the chute, running towards the toe. We've seen Mikey make mistakes here, but he's got a bit of a gap to the drivers behind Douglas and Wagner. 2 championship contenders continuing to fight it amongst themselves as they have all season. And at the front of the field, Elizondo and Vasquez. Elizondo got a little bit wide into turn 9 there. Maybe that's trying to get a better run at the exit of the corner. Get on the throttle earlier, take the less opportune entry, carry more speed out. And they continue on. Douglas ahead of Wagner, far away from that must win, but at least ahead of the championship leader. And Douglas trying to force Mikey to go defensive again. Mikey not taking the bait, very stoic in his third place position and wide out like a NASCAR run through turn one. Wagner made the same mistake nearly. Wagner actually almost lost it, got very, very sideways, somehow held on to it, but that has dropped Wagner outside of that slipstream range. And Douglas, this is as good of an opportunity as ever to try and get free from the clutches of Mikey up ahead. Mikey makes a bit of a mistake, carrying a lot of speed through the bus stop, but seemingly losing control of the car slightly. I don't think it's going to be enough. Wagner is back in this fight. Elizondo and Vasquez just continuing their fight. And a bit of a checkup on the team standings. Douglas and Bird with Peregrine Racing should be in a very good contention, or very good position to clinch the team championship. Big grill energy with Lindbergh and Heiderstadt. With Atwell being laps down and down a few positions, I think that would be enough to jump the pair higher up the order. As I got scared for a second there and thought Wagner got out on his own, but no, it was the teammate of Atwell behind our leaders. And pushing very, very hard. Douglas and Wagner trying desperately to find a way past Mikey. And I think maybe they're just ignoring the track limits at this point, taking that NASCAR line. As Wagner wants to go up the inside of Douglas, Wagner is going to go up the inside. Douglas lets him. Mikey goes too deep into the bus stop. Mikey rejoins. Is Douglas going to be able to find a way past Wagner? And no, the worst possible outcome for Douglas has reared its head. Wagner up ahead. Wagner has shown to be the quicker driver here in this fight. And Douglas cannot let Wagner pull away. Desperately needs to stay in that slipstream, but that is not going to help. Very deep into turn 7. And Douglas now with Mikey right behind. Wagner may be in a prime position to sail off into the sunset. As Wagner, again, racing very hard. Mikey had a bit of an incident there. I think late on the brakes, or didn't expect Douglas to brake that early. Had to abandon the corner. And all three of these drivers, you could put a blanket over them. Now you can land a plane between them, as they have become very spread out. Battle for the lead continues, as Vasquez and Elizondo seemingly have not moved forward or back from each other since the very beginning of this race. Just running on their own. Now Wagner starting to break free of Douglas in that clean air, able to run on his own. Douglas needs to get within slipstream range, needs to try and hold on to Wagner, but Wagner, broken free of the chains, is now going to be quite the force to be reckoned with. And Douglas just once again getting that poorer run out of the bus stop. And the gap to Mikey behind shrinks. And very wide around the chute. Is that a strategy to try to get a better run out of the chute, carry more speed out? Or has Douglas driven the tires off of this car early? Again, these drivers are more than likely going to take these cars the full distance, the full hour of this race. back on board with this fight for the lead. Vasquez and Elizondo really just putting a masterclass of pace on, as Elizondo actually goes wide at the penultimate corner. Is that going to give Vasquez an opportunity to try and find a way past? Will he go offensive into turn one? No, we'll just follow right behind. Stay in that slipstream as long as possible and just cruise on. Two things Vasquez is doing here. He's able to save his tires a little bit by not having to push so hard. He's also able to save a little bit of fuel, which you should be overloaded with fuel ready to take this thing to the end anyway. Vasquez had a little bit of a look into the bus stop trying to force the mistake from Elizondo, but it has not happened. Either try to force the mistake or try to force Elizondo to take a little bit of an evasive maneuver. But again, neither outcome happened there for Vasquez. Douglas back within slipstream range of Wagner, but Mikey getting dropped off of this fight. And Wagner approaching the teammate of Atwell. Is Atwell going to maybe be given some team orders here and have Wagner say, hey, I need some tow. I need you to help me get away from this guy behind me. Come pull me along. Or if Douglas gets close enough to go past Wagner, will Wagner just let him by? Because again, Wagner currently has this championship clinched. Does not need to win, doesn't need a podium. Makes a big mistake though. And Wagner into the wall, I believe. I think I do see a little bit of damage on the right-hand side of that BMW. Yes, I do. He did make a collision with the wall, and Douglas doesn't have to do any work, is able to just sail right on by. Wagner went very, very wide at turn 9. Got onto that curb and spun that car right around into the wall. Now Douglas will try to run away with it here. A long way to go to those leaders up ahead for that must win. But again, that must win is covered off by Wagner currently. I don't think the damage that Wagner took is going to be anything that will really be much of a detriment to his pace. Wagner, if he wants to get back onto that podium, is going to have to push pretty hard to do so. And Douglas with a much better run through the chute that time. Still just needs to hold Wagner off. Vasquez seemingly getting dropped off of Elizondo up ahead, as that gap has grown to nearly a second. And has the split begun? Elizondo had a bit of a wiggle coming out of turn 9 there. And what has happened here? Wilson made it past Young earlier, is now going to try and find a way past the number 45 of Lindbergh. And Lindbergh and Heiderstadt, I believe, do have the points covered for the team championship. So I think they may be promoted to P2. But again, anything can happen. There is still 30 minutes of this race left to go. Vasquez out of slipstream range. Wagner behind, also outside of slipstream range of Douglas, even though he is right on the cusp of it. Just have to see if Wagner is able to get close enough. Took about a 10th out of that gap. And this is Douglas's poison here, the bus stop, that final chicane coming out of the bus stop, that final curb especially. just kills Douglas's exit momentum, and Wagner is right back here in this fight. Up into turn 7. Douglas P3, Wagner P4. Wilson has made it around Lindbergh. I don't know if he went for it around the outside or what, but he has made it as Lindbergh going to fight it back here into turn number 8. Lindbergh had a look, but it is not going to be enough. Wilson does afford him the space, though. Coming around. Wilson will get that move covered off. A big slide coming through turn number 9, though. We'll just have to see if he can hold on to it, as Lindbergh is right behind and deeply applying that pressure. But I think Wilson may have the pace to have it covered off. Wagner right back in that slipstream range of Douglas. And again, as I have iterated before, Wagner does seem to be the quicker driver in this fight and well within that slipstream now. But a big mistake from Wagner, too deep into the bus stop, undoes all of that work. And at what point, if you're Wagner, do you say, I've got this championship covered, he needs to win it, I need to finish P16 or lower, maybe I just back out of it here? Number 47 of Miller with some issues, some big damage up ahead. It does force Wagner and Mikey to take a slower line around the outside, as I think Miller is going to be crawling that BMW back to the pit lane. But at what point do you say, don't need to push that far, don't need to push that hard, don't need to take that damage, don't want to give the opportunity to Douglas here? It's like in fantasy football, that one player has that 1% chance of losing you that game or winning you that game. And a 1% chance is still a 1% chance. It's not a 0% chance. In my eyes here, Wagner can let the field around him take their positions, as Young had the car stalled in the middle of the track, tries to get it refired, but a bit of an Austin Powers. Who was that? The number 19 of Merkel. And Young just trying to get this M6. It is a very large car, just trying to get it turned back around on the racing surface. Eventually does, and there will be memes about that later on. Is Wagner going to be continuing to make some mistakes? As again, Wagner just pushing too hard, doesn't need to, has the championship clinched. It just needs to, I think, let Douglas have it, let Douglas run away. Again, he is in a must-win position and has quite the gap to the leaders to make. Need something catastrophic from them. But Vasquez 1.8 seconds behind the leader, Elizondo. They ran about a quarter of a second between each other for the majority of this race. But then just pushing too hard, Vasquez dropped out of that slipstream range. And now Vasquez trying to take it back and fight his way back in. And Wilson into the pit lane. Is this a pit on strategy? I believe it is. Maybe he just didn't have enough fuel in it. Expecting the majority of the field to go the full distance, as there is no mandatory pit stop. But into the pit goes Wilson. And I guess while you're stopped, you might as well take tires, take the time penalty for going into the pit lane and just take it all. And Wilson does seem to be putting tires on that car as he is still in that pit lane. Number 109 of Heiderstadt and the number 19 of Merkel have gone by. No, there's no problem with watching a little bit of racing, especially a series finale. Number 246 and the 23 of Young. Young was that BMW that had that bit of an Austin Powers moment between turns 9 and 10. And Young will now try to fight some positions back and make it past the number 246 of Trotman Grant here, who's actually currently in P2 in that Holy Grail division tonight. But very, very wide through the bus stop. And I think Young will just slot through the inside at the outer loop. But no, Trotman Grant will fight it back. Trotman Grant will be deeper on the brakes into the chute. Young will try to get a better run on the outside. It's not quite going to happen. How is it faring between Douglas and Wagner? Wagner, that gap is growing. How is the gap forward? Was 11 seconds between Vasquez and Douglas, but I think that gap may have dropped a little bit. No, it has actually grown. Vasquez and Elizondo showing that superior pace to the rest of the field. And Vasquez still chipping away in that gap. Was 1.8, then 1.6, now 1.4. And Elizondo going a little wide. These drivers at the front, especially around a track such as Watkins Glen, they are going to have no tires left at the end of this race. You think the slip may be bad now. It's going to get a whole lot worse in these next 20 minutes. Vasquez chipping more and more time away, 1.3 seconds to gap. Now desperately needs to get back into that slipstream range of Elizondo. And through turn 11, trying to hold it wide out to the outside wall, does exactly that. And when they come across the line, how is this gap updated once more? Continues to hold 1.4 seconds. Vasquez desperately just needs to get back within that slipstream range. Douglas with Wagner was 2.3 seconds behind now 2 seconds behind. And again, remember, Douglas, Wagner, and Mikey were all three running within half a second of each other for the first third of this race, until eventually the mistakes did come. The cycle can only go on for so long until it loses entropy and something breaks, something is lost. And when that happened, Douglas was able to take advantage, move up into P3, resuming his position in qualifying. The leaders at the front, 1.3 seconds was the gap at Sector 1. How is it looking at the end of Sector 2? 1.30. And again, likely going to be running these cars all the way to the end of this race. Vasquez just needs to get a better run out of these two corners than Elizondo. Is a crucial point to really gain some time is going to be this pit straight. And it seems to be that Elizondo is just quicker through that Sector 3. The gap back at 1.4 seconds. Vasquez does really seem to close that gap between Sector 1 and Sector 2. Wagner on Douglas. The gap is now sub 2 seconds. And Douglas is pushing. Wagner seems to be pushing as well. I understand the need to race. But again, if I were in Wagner's position here, you have this championship clinched. You do not want to do anything out of the ordinary. Don't want to lose this championship by making a mistake that puts you in the wall, puts you in the pit lane. It's the last thing that you're going to want to do. Just drive it calm. But I think Wagner also wants to finish this season off with a podium. Championship is good, but not quite good enough. You need a podium here in this race. But if you would like to see an absolutely monstrous run, go back last week. The recording is still on Twitch, but you can also find it on the YouTube channel. Go back a week. Watch the Bathurst 1 hour. And Elizondo involved in a lap 1 incident where pretty much the entire field had nowhere to go up the cutting. And Wagner stopped, essentially went to the back of the field, somehow clawed his way all the way back up the order. And even when the leaders were running away, somehow managed to pull that lead back in and win that race. Again, the gap holding steady between Elizondo and Vasquez, 1.4 seconds. The gap between Vasquez and Douglas continuing to grow. And Douglas's championship hopes, I believe, are dashed. Championship hopes that aren't dashed, though, is going to be Heiderstadt, who has just done exactly what he needed to, run in the mid-pack overall. Really just needed to cover off Atwell, who had that incident and ended up going into the pit lane, now laps down. As long as Heiderstadt has enough fuel in this car to go the distance, which if it were me, I would have overloaded this thing, put a full tank in it, and just cruised my way to the end. But Heiderstadt should be in a good position to clinch that Holy Grail Championship and be your Holy Grail champion. Wilson, who has clawed his way back up the order after pitting, is trying to make it past Trotman Grant. Just made it past breakfast. And what has happened here right at 1 second? Is it going to be less than 1 second? Is Vasquez onto the back of Elizondo? No, it still grows. It gets that 1/10 back, as it always does when they come across the start-finish line. The gap grows by 1/10. But Vasquez seems to have found something. And with 15 minutes left of this race, Vasquez just ever so much closer to getting back within that slipstream range for P3 behind. Wagner running very wide through turn 1, still also trying to get within that slipstream range. Both Vasquez and Wagner very, very close to getting within the slipstream range of their respective drivers that they are battling with. And if Vasquez were able to get within that slipstream range down the run from turn 1 all the way to the bus stop, that would be a perfect run for Vasquez to try and stick behind for the rest of this race and send that Hail Mary move at the very end. But Vasquez goes wide at turn 7. And is that going to make things a little bit harder for Vasquez to close up onto Elizondo? We got a three-way fight for position. Wilson trying to find a way past Trotman Grant. just having some trouble setting up that overtake, even though he does have the fresher tires and fresher car. And Breakfast is right behind, enjoying that slipstream. Breakfast goes to send it on Wilson. Wilson lets him, wants to go around the outside. Trotman Grant had a bit of a mistake on his own. And Wilson will try to get a better run up the S's than Trotman Grant, and maybe try to get this move done and concluded by the time they get into the bus stop. Not close enough. Maybe the mistake comes from Trotman Grant. It does not through the bus stop there. Wagner does get a bit of a, or not Wagner, Wilson gets a bit of a more inside exit of the bus stop, and I think Wilson, they're going to be side by side coming down into the chute. And will Wilson try it around the outside? Has to be afforded the space. He has the space. Looking like they're 3 wide for a second, but Wilson has got it done. And Wilson moves up into P11. The gap between Vasquez and Elizondo continues to hold right at that 0.9 of a second. Wagner and Douglas continuing their fight, almost picturesque. Mirrored the fight between Elizondo and Vasquez, Douglas and Wagner. These two fights holding about the same gap. And really, the drivers in about the same positions. This time Wagner much closer on Douglas than he was previously. We'll see how this gap lines out when they come across the start-finish line. Vasquez almost within that slipstream range. And has Vasquez just tried to save enough tires till the very end of this race, taking the NASCAR line through turn 1. It's wider than you want to go, and you don't want to get a penalty for doing it. But as long as you lose time in doing it, you really don't have too much to worry about it. Through the bus stop, Vasquez still chasing Elizondo. Now within slipstream range, Wagner right behind Douglas. Douglas can throw away the hope for the championship. It's not going to happen. He is not going to get the must win. And Wagner is not going to finish P16. It is just not going to happen unless Wagner's engine blows up, which I don't think is going to happen. Douglas with Wagner now applying pressure once again. And I have a very good suspicion that Douglas is not going to let Wagner have this third place, the final spot on the podium. Very easy at all. Douglas is going to make Wagner fight for it tooth and nail. And Wagner, a bit of a mistake. Those tires definitely showing their age. And at the front, Vasquez within slipstream range. Just needs to hold that slipstream range when they come out of turn number 1. Just a few laps left in this race. Vasquez again taking that NASCAR line, running right by the NASCAR logo. As they run up through the S's. Vasquez within that slipstream range, just needs to get close enough. Drinking game for slipstream range. We'll treat it like a Super GT video. I should have said that at the very beginning. And Vasquez getting a great run through the outer loop. Some traffic up ahead. The fight for P3, Douglas and Wagner. Douglas needs a better run than Wagner. Wagner consistently better than Douglas coming through the bus stop. Now Vasquez right behind Elizondo. That traffic is up ahead. We'll see if Vasquez is going to be able to set this move up. Is it going to come down to a dive bomb? It very well may. Vasquez is right behind. Battle for P3. We're going to be jumping between these two fights. Hopefully all the way here to the end of this race. Wagner very, very wide through turn 8 into turn 9. Wagner right on the rear of Douglas. And we have seen Wagner make mistakes in this exact same position fighting against Mikey and Douglas prior in this race. Traffic up ahead. That does give Elizondo some slipstream. But that is also going to help Vasquez a lot. As this traffic, as Elizondo now showing them the flashers. Traffic up ahead. Elizondo wants to try and find a way past. Elizondo is not going to find a way past before the bus stop. That was the move that Elizondo was looking for, but it is not going to happen. Now they're going to be in the tight technical section between turns 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Very hard to get past traffic there. Elizondo going to try going up the inside of who is that in the 81? That is Breakfast. Goes up the inside of Breakfast. Breakfast with Vasquez. Vasquez goes around the outside. Elizondo for slightly wide. That means that Vasquez gets right up behind. Trotman Grant. Blue flags to the outside. Vasquez not quite going to be able to make it past. Does have to take the narrower and suboptimal line. And that is not going to help Vasquez in this fight. Again, just a few laps left in this race. Granados with an incident at turn number 1 into the pit lane. Douglas and Wagner, same position. They are also going to be catching that traffic. Maybe won't catch them by the end of the race, but they are quicker than that traffic. We'll see how the gap lines up at the start-finish line. And Vasquez has lost a little bit of time, but again, still has that slipstream range. There is more traffic up ahead. Elizondo and Vasquez continuing their fight. Douglas and Wagner. Is Douglas able to pull away from Wagner slightly? Wagner outside of slipstream range. Has Wagner made a mistake? Again, no longer racing for the championship. Wagner has all but gotten that secured, both taking the very, very wide line through turn 1. They have no tires left on these cars. We have seen them slip and slide ever since the beginning of this race. But they have no tires left. 55 minutes on their tires so far. 3 laps left of this race. And Vasquez now applying the pressure, waiting until the very end. These two have run one behind the other. Elizondo has led every single lap of this race. Elizondo now under attack. Finally goes defensive. Is Vasquez going to try it around the outside? May be able to get a nose into turn 9. Will not. Has to just once again slot behind. Needs to make sure that he gets on the power as smooth as possible. Elizondo doing the same thing. Get on the throttle too early, wiggle that rear, lose all of your momentum at corner exit, and your race is going to be pretty much over. Push too hard, make a mistake, go into the outside wall at turn 11. Both of those drivers, top tier drivers. Really the upper echelon of skill, especially the way that they have been able to fight this entire race. Bumper to bumper all the way through. And it's going to culminate in a win for one of these two drivers. Elizondo in front of Vasquez. Vasquez has been able to cruise behind, building up that energy. When is he going to release that energy? Vasquez just waiting for the right time to strike, is now just running right behind Elizondo. needs to apply the pressure or wait for that one fatal mistake from Elizondo to open the door for Vasquez to walk right through, but neither of these drivers very prone to mistakes, as they have both been absolutely on it all night. Wagner back within slipstream range of Douglas. 2 laps left of this race. Elizondo once again got wide at turn 7. That has been a recurring issue for Elizondo. Not really too big of an issue though, as it is hard to get enough speed with that slipstream to make that move by the time you get to turn number 8. Elizondo with a bit of a slide at turn 9 though. That does open the door slightly. He can see the outside, he can see the other side, just no real way to get past yet. And again, they have traffic up ahead, Young up ahead. That is the number 47 of Miller. And Miller with more damage. Young up ahead is going to be getting blue flags. Elizondo going to go up the inside. Is Young going to stay to the outside? And Vasquez will also go up the inside. No loss of time there. Maybe Vasquez has had that gap open up a little bit, and has that gap opened up outside of slipstream range for Vasquez? If it's not outside of slipstream range, it's right on the very edge of it. 5:01 was the gap at the previous line. 7:54 right outside of that slipstream range is Vasquez, but he can get right back into it. But it's going to be a 1-lap shootout when they come to the line. Elizondo versus Vasquez. Douglas versus Wagner. Wagner back within that slipstream range of Douglas. Douglas holding on to that 3rd place. Wagner will try and find a way past again. Wagner very weak at the bus stop. Has been this entire race, but is able to cover the move off throughout the rest of the track. Vasquez pushing. Almost 4 tires off into the grass. Needs to get back within that slipstream range. 0.8 of a second behind. The slipstream really starts to become into a factor around 0.7, 3/4 of a second. Vasquez will have to try and get back within that slipstream range. Elizondo, we've seen him make mistakes at turn 9 here. If another one happens, that could be cause for Vasquez to get back in it. No, but Young does have a little bit of a slip behind. And it's going to be 1 lap to go, the final lap of this TRC BM246W Challenge Series. Vasquez trying to get within slipstream range of Elizondo, but again, Elizondo faster through Sector 3, 1.1 seconds the gap. Vasquez not within slipstream range, not any longer. This battle for P3 has been culminating this entire race. The 2 that have had a going at it this entire season, Douglas and Wagner. Douglas really showing that he has the skills to compete. And they both go very, very wide. No stops held. They both take the NASCAR line through turn number 1. And it is gnashing teeth and elbows out here to the end. Wagner flashing, trying to find a way past. He has a slipstream. He's going to get alongside. They go side by side into the bus stop. Going to try and force Douglas deep into the bus stop. It is not going to work, though, and Wagner will just have to slot behind. Vasquez with traffic up ahead, unable to close back up to Elizondo, and Elizondo just a few corners left to take that checkered flag home. Douglas and Wagner. Wagner has secured the championship. Wagner will be your overall champion. Heiderstadt will be your Holy Grail champion. But who takes 3rd place? Who gets the final spot on the podium? Coming up out of turn 9, that's really the last time that Elizondo could make a mistake. Wagner still flashing these lights. Douglas trying to hold on to this position. Wagner running outside very, very wide across the line. Elizondo will come across and take the checkered flag and get the win in the final race of this TRC BM246W Challenge Series. Vasquez takes P2. Who gets P3 though? I think Wagner pushed too hard, had a mistake. at turn 9. Yes, he has, and Douglas did what he could, unable to take the championship away from Wagner, but will take P3, Wagner P4. And that is going to bring an end to this series as we get some donuts from Elizondo celebrating that victory. Mikey across the line, P5. Bird across the line, P6. And it's no real sour grapes for Douglas, as he is going to bring home the team championship win with Bird. And Lindbergh and Heiderstadt finishing 1-2 beside each other will take home P2, I believe, in that team championship standings. And Heiderstadt, with just 2 corners to go, will be crowned Holy Grail champion and will win in his final race in a Holy Grail championship, as he is about to be promoted. Holy Grail win for Heiderstadt, P8 overall, and the Holy Grail championship for Heiderstadt. Getting some birds, or some, I say some burnouts from Bird, some birds, some bird outs, as Bird has taken that team championship alongside Douglas. The Peregrine racing team of Douglas and Bird. This is your team championship winner. Heiderstadt, the number 109, your Holy Grail championship winner. And Wagner in the number 99, your overall championship winner. We have crowned a few champions tonight. We have seen the culmination of this season from beginning to end. And it has been a wild one, a lot of shakeups. Wagner takes the championship, Douglas and Bird the team championship, and Heiderstadt the Holy Grail championship. Thank you all for tuning in tonight, tuning in throughout this season, watching the streams on the replay, watching the streams on YouTube, watching them on Twitch, supporting me throughout my commentating endeavors. This is going to wrap up another season with TRC. I think this may be season 5 that I've wrapped up with TRC. So that's going to be about 50 races done so far with TRC, and plenty more to come. That's going to bring an end to the coverage tonight. Remember, don't go anywhere. And if you are not following, consider following the Twitch and YouTube channels. And you could personally give me some donation or tip through the About tab on my channel, or you can use a Twitch Prime subscription or just a regular old Twitch subscription. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and give somebody a raid. Spread the love as usual. And just once again, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you with whatever TRC comes up with next. And also, just a quick little tidbit announcement. I will be commentating the first 2 hours of the Oned 6 hour. The Oned Racing 6 hours of the Nordschleife. I am going to be co-commentating that with the Oned staff. It's going to be my first PC stream, also my first directed stream, where there is going to be a producer in the booth controlling the cameras, and I am just offering up my voice. Alright, let's find somebody to raid, and then we will be done for tonight, and I'm going to go eat dinner. Alright, we are going to go raid OSG42, who is doing a Rookie 2 Racer Challenge, and we're going to go ahead and just throw them the raid. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in throughout this season and throughout all of my streams, and I will see you all later. Have a good night, and stay safe out there.